Hello and welcome to Sujata's Cognitive Classroom. In today's session, we will be looking at how our cognitive functions develop over time and how we mature with age. Okay, so I've said before that our cognitive functions, our psyche, is made of two parts, right? The conscious psyche and the unconscious psyche. Totally, there are 8 positions, and the first 4 are part of our conscious psyche, and the next 4 are hidden in the unconscious. They're also called the shadow functions. Now, what happens is that all of these functions don't develop equally and at the same time. They don't develop with the same level of importance. They don't develop together. They actually develop step by step. So what happens is that certain functions are sort of inborn, and so we express them starting very early. And some other functions, even if they are inborn, are quite weak. And so we must spend time explicitly and effort to build them. And at a time, generally, you can't be actively working on developing too many functions. Because the reason for that is that some of them are opposing. They have different, polar opposite nature, and you can't be working on developing both at the same time. That's just not possible. So what happens is that they are both important though. So it's like you have to be flexible and you have to be strict. You have to follow rules and you have to know when to break them. So it's like that. You have to learn to do one thing at a time. And over time, the good news is that you can develop all of them. You have it in you to develop all the functions that are useful to you and to manage the functions that are sort of not within your accessible reach. Okay, so now what I'm going to talk about is how to, or rather when and how our conscious cognitive functions develop. Okay, what are our conscious cognitive functions? Like I said, there are 4 of them. The hero or the dominant, the good parent or the auxiliary, the eternal child or the tertiary, and 4th, the anima animus or the inferior function. And they go down in order in terms of their strength in our psyche, right? And they are developed at different points in time in our lives. So now what I'm going to be looking at is what is it that we develop and when? Oops, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I'm just learning to use these tools. I'm not very good at them, but I'm sure you'll bear with me, won't you? So the first function is there with us actually right from childhood. So you know how we talk about children as, oh, he is such a good rule follower. He is so obedient. Or, oh my goodness, she's such a drama queen. Oh, this baby is so naughty. He's so funny. Or you might say, my goodness, she is such a rebel. Or you might say something like, oh my God, he seems like a wise old soul. He's so quiet. So we sort of recognize certain aspects of a person's behavior even from when they are babies, which means that those functions are expressed even without anybody having to teach them to use them. They are extremely natural to us and they are intrinsic to our nature. But having said that, we still need to develop them. We still need to learn to use them and learn to channelize them well and apply them appropriately at various points in life. Okay, so that's the first function. Over time, this is the function that gets the maximum exposure and the maximum training, and so it becomes our most competent function in terms of what we contribute to the world. Our output to the world often comes from using our first function really well, and that's why it's also called the hero. But like all galloping, swashbuckling heroes, this one also is a little bit much sometimes. So that's where the second function comes in, what we call the good parent. Now, the good parent function channels the energy of the hero function. The hero is kind of off galloping with unbridled energy, and the good parent sort of tethers that runaway horse and gives it some direction and channels its energy into a more productive output. So, in that sense, the second function what we develop as our own individual. It's sort of what we identify as our individuality. Yes, the first function is very intrinsic to us and it's our natural selves, but our own personally developed sense of identity comes from the second function, because that is what we spend our teenage and youth developing. Now, typically, this can be seen in the form of, people saying that, oh, she changed so much during her teenage, or she bloomed into her own person as a young lady or as a young man, right? And that comes from our having developed our second function and sort of learning to express it to the world. So, in an introvert, the second function, the good parent function, is the function that helps the introvert engage with the world, either to understand what's happening outside or to make decisions for themselves, right? You look outwards. And because at the end of the day, see, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, whatever, some part of your understanding has to come from outside, and some part of who you think you are and what you are and your decisions have to happen within your own self. And both of those have to coexist. You can't be too much, too coddled and too shelled up in your own world. Neither can you be all out there with no ability to reflect internally. So being able to balance the processes that happen in that inward looking processes and the outward looking processes is a very important part of growth. And that fundamental need is what is balanced by the first and the second functions. If the first function is outward facing, the second one is inward facing. And if the first one is inward facing, the second one is outward facing. And that's how they work. So that's the second function. The third function is what we develop in our midlife, and it often presents itself as a midlife crisis. I'll tell you why that is the case. Because what happens is that you've spent all this time developing your second function, which is your identity, like I said, right? And after all of that, you find that that isn't enough. Because midlife throws gauntlets at you. By this time, you have seen some failures and you've repeated certain patterns of behavior that have not really worked for you. And you're constantly doing the same thing. Say, for example, you are dilly-dallying too much. You're not coming to decisions. You don't have structure. And you're all over the place, which was all fine and dandy as long as you were hanging around in a college hostel and you had no structure to your life. But you can't run your midlife in a haphazard way. So what I'm trying to get to is that the very thing that you spent all your time in your teenage and youth building now is not good enough, and now you're being asked to develop the exact opposite of that. Obviously difficult, and hence the crisis in midlife. So if I take an example, the second function, let's say, is extroverted feeling, where you are warm to the world, you make sure everybody is included, you make sure there is harmony, and more or less you've been keeping everyone pleased. But in keeping everyone pleased, you have lost yourself. You're giving too much. You are sacrificing too much. Your own priorities have been taking a backseat. A lot of you are going to relate to this. I know. I see you. I hear you. In midlife, then you must work on prioritizing yourself, on listening to your own value system, on developing a value system and a point of view and an opinion all your own. So, if the second stage was extroverted feeling, the third function will be extrovert feeling, yeah, the third function will be introverted thinking. That's the opposite. It is difficult to do it, but it's possible because by this time life has sort of primed you to be able to do that. And those who succeed in building that function, the third function, are those who bloom in their midlife. So you know how it goes, right? In midlife, people typically kind of fall into one of two categories in that they are either like, oh my goodness, he has made a success of his life, or oh God, he had so much potential, but somehow he never came through. He keeps sabotaging himself. That is a classic marker of the third function not being developed. Versus, I mean, the difference between developing the third function and not developing the third function. And it's a little bit difficult, but it's worth the journey. And in fact, it's so worth the journey that you feel accomplished. You see a lot of people running marathons in their midlife because of things like this, because they're developing a routine. They probably never had a routine before that. And so they're learning to hunker down and follow a routine, right? The final one is the inferior. The inferior is not always developed. I mean, yes, I have put it down to later years. And for those who develop it, either they develop it in their later years, like old age or something like that, or because of some major traumatic event, or after several hard knocks when you sort of have to develop that wisdom. So it's what contributes to our being wise. You know, that's why we call old people wise, because they have learned to integrate their fourth function. Now, the fourth function it's there all the time actually, even when we are younger, even in our midlife, but it is more of a pain. It expresses itself when you are under stress. Now, see, the third function comes through, it's called the eternal child because it comes through and it tries to please the good parent, the second function. So, the third function tries to please the second function, like a child tries to please a good parent. So, it is earnest. It is good. It tries to do the right thing, but it's not consistent and it's a little clumsy. Okay, so it's a nice function, but it only comes through when you're either playful or you're happy or you're calm, or under pressure, this child tries to be the good child who behaves well in difficult circumstances. So under pressure, you use the third function. You get, you can be organized sometimes, but not always, kind of thing. So under pressure, you can be organized, maybe, right? But you can't keep that going all the time. So that is a classic third function behavior. The fourth function, on the other hand, comes out during stress, not pressure, stress. That's not a nice side of you. You act out. It's your rebel function. Why rebel? Because the fourth function diametrically opposes the first function. And the first function, remember, is the dominant one, which you've been practicing and practicing and practicing, and you had so much practice with from ever since you were a child. So naturally, it is so strong and so dominating that the fourth function doesn't have a chance. It doesn't have a fighting chance to develop. So it rebels, and it's the exact opposite of the hero. And in some sense, it is the function that needs to speak truth to power. It is the opposite of the most powerful function. But we need to develop that as well. So it is very hard. So for example, if I'm, say, an extroverted, if my first function is extroverted intuition and I am open to possibilities and I like to brainstorm and I can do things in the last minute, I can improvise. And I don't really plan because I don't need plans and I don't like plans, let's say, and I'm constantly improvising and winging it and living, like figuring it out in the moment. What I'm definitely not doing is planning. What I'm definitely not doing all this while is having a routine. But you can't live a life that just flits from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing without consolidating anything and spending a lot of time learning one thing or doing one thing. And that is your fourth function then. If your first function is one of improvising, your fourth function is one of following the norm, following the routine, and doing the same thing monotonously again and again and again without getting bored. See, that's important too. So in the fourth function then it becomes very hard for you to develop, but then you have to. And if you actually do it, either in your old age or because life demands that from you and you successfully did it, then what happens is there is a great amount of personal energy and wisdom and and calmness that comes over you, because now you have access to your shadow functions. The fourth function is the gateway to the shadow functions, to the unconscious functions. And this is the function, if you develop, you can actually release your bad energies, you can release your insecurities, you can get rid of the things that block you. So that's a much bigger and harder topic to discuss, honestly. But I will close this today's video with just a simple summary that the first function is what you're intrinsically born with and you naturally express. The second function is what you build as your own identity through your early years and your youth. The third function is what manifests as midlife crisis but gives you great satisfaction from developing. And the fourth function is what manifests as wisdom and is the gateway to releasing yourself of insecurities. So I hope you found this presentation helpful, and I look forward to hearing from you, because really I would like this to be a conversation. It's not just me talking. Please do talk back to me as well through comments and feedback. Yeah, because we both can learn from each other. And until the next video, thank you for watching. See you soon.